Okay, greetings and welcome to another Grenfell MediaWatch update. Today's issue I'm going to call The Winds of Change. And one piece of news that we reviewed last week was that of Kensington and Chelsea's tenant management organisation having their contract revoked. But we knew that was coming. What's equally concerning is that Paul Atkins, a fire safety consultant, he's been putting the success rate of fire sprinklers, if they'd been retrofitted inside buildings such as Grenfell, as high as 99%. So the TMO really didn't have any excuse to not consider these complaints that the residents were giving them and actually take action. There was a course of action that could have been taken, but it wasn't. The week actually started though with a horrific story about a survivor actually being forced to use a food bank. So you've got to think there's £20 million in this pot, and yet some residents are still destitute. This is kind of ineptitude of what they call it, the Care for Grenfell team. Last week there was also a report in the media about hundreds of people who have been scammed out of their money by a website called Grenfell Tower Fund. But there was one news story last week that had a huge impact on our team. That would be BBC Newsnight's report on the families that lived on the 21st floor of Grenfell.
I just can't believe that they're gone. They're just gone, just like that.
It was a very, very good piece of journalism, very emotional, and at last it felt people-centred and not so exploitative, some of the other pieces. Yeah, I don't think anyone in our house slept very well after watching that, but it revealed the human element to the story, which often is missed in the statistics and facts. Last week we also found out that the coroner's back at work and has announced that up to 18 children perished in the fire. They've been formally identified, so now their families can actually start looking at actually giving them a burial. Now, many of you have probably noticed that alongside the official investigations, there's also been a kind of ad hoc media inquiry. And this has been quite useful to us because it's been bringing up information and stories that we might otherwise not have heard. Professor Harwood's investigation is kind of announcing that the cladding could pass the fire test once done in a lab, but once exposed to water, becomes flammable. Now this provides a really convenient answers for building contractors and developers who would say, well, when we did the test, everything was fine. It was only when it was exposed in the real world that it became a fire risk. And I don't like that. So one of the other tragic tales that we heard last week was the man who heard his family making emergency calls, calling for helicopters to come and save them as the inferno took place.
He lost 6 members of his family and believes they suffered needless deaths. He partly blames the role of the police helicopter that night as it hovered above and around the tower as part of the emergency operation. In a witness statement, Nabil describes its presence as offering a cruel and tortuous hope to his family trapped on the 22nd floor.
Many of us have probably heard fire chiefs telling us that there was absolutely nothing else that could be done to save the victims of the massacre that day. You know, I'm not an expert, I'm not a fire safety expert, but I was walking along this very same stretch last week, and as I was walking, 2 Chinook helicopters flew over my head. And I guess when I saw those army helicopters flying over, I couldn't shake that feeling. What if a member of the royal family was visiting the tower on that day?
They thought the police helicopter would rescue them.
My family especially, yes, and I believe even other families, but my family members totally.
And I can't shake the feeling that they would have utilised every possible tool at their disposal. What if the 2 princes, you know, the Harry and the other one, was there? Those Chinook helicopters would have been deployed. So I think I want to close this on a discussion about the need for political intervention and not political masturbation. Last week was the Labour conference, and Matt Rack made a very impassioned speech, very powerful speech.
When we analyse this horror, you will find that what created the circumstances that allowed it to happen is a whole chain of decisions, and those are decisions made by politicians. And if it's a real public inquiry, I have to say that government ministers will be summoned to answer questions and to be cross-examined about their role in this.
David Isaacs, the ECHR chair, makes a really good point, and he makes a comment that, especially in the context of Grenfell, that not only the wealthy should have access to justice, and that the Commission should actually have more power, especially with Brexit taking place. Right now, we need a firm commitment to human rights. We need politicians that are brave, that are courageous, that have a moral centre, that will champion the causes of the vulnerable in society.
The disdain for the powerless and the poor have made our society more brutal and less caring. Now that degraded regime has a tragic monument, the chilling wreckage of Grenfell Tower.
Whilst I'm not a Labour member, I am a supporter of the values that Jeremy Corbyn espouses. But all I want to say is that in a year's time, the Grenfell survivors will need real support, tangible support. And what I'm hoping is that these politicians don't leave us out in the wilderness. So I want to close and say, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Ashe.